listening to Regeneration Rising, a podcast from Quivira Coalition's new agrarian program that provides information and inspiration to agrarians beginning their journey in regenerative agriculture. Each episode will explore what it means to work in regenerative agriculture, how people come to choose this as their livelihood, and why it's important to them and our future. We hope this podcast provides a foundation of knowledge for future agrarians and land stewards so they can rise up and focus on a regenerative approach to community, relationships, and the land.
Hello and welcome back to the Regeneration Rising podcast. I'm Taylor Mulia, and today my guest is Dylan Boeken. He is the owner of Boek, Hearth, and Husbandry, a regenerative grazing and meat business in Southern California. I found Dylan's business to be so unique that I really thought it'd be helpful to share on this podcast. The passion that Dylan brings to this industry is not only in the land management, but also in the whole big picture of connecting people back with their food, specifically with butchery and cooking meat, which is really a lost art that most of us have really forgotten. And his business is working on connecting people back through education and whole animal butchery. So I really enjoyed our conversation, and I hope you do too. But first, I wanted to make a big announcement from here at the Regeneration Rising podcast. I am actually leaving Quivira and moving on to my next position after 4 years. It has been such a marvelous ride. This podcast will continue to interview beginning agrarians, but it will be with a different host who I'm sure will make it bigger, brighter, and certainly better. I have enjoyed deeply doing this podcast, and it was really not something that I thought I would be doing when I started this job. But being the most obnoxious and loudest person on our team, I thought I was fit for the job, and it has really worked out very well. I've been very happy and really thankful. Thanks to the Quivira Coalition and my team at the New Agrarian Program for trusting me with this project and letting me do whatever the heck I wanted, which is absolutely insane. I've been so lucky. Thank you for the folks who help with this podcast. We have a list of people who make this production happen every month. And thanks to all the guests we've had over 50 episodes at this point. And most importantly, thank you to all of you. Thank you to our listeners. We are so thankful to be able to reach this audience in a new way. And most of you are out there doing the work and listening to this podcast in a truck or in a tractor or, sometimes out there doing fencing for hours and hours. And it's you that we really wanted to reach and to serve. After these 4 years, the podcast has gone in a lot of different directions, but ultimately my goal was to convey the message to all of you that even though this work is hard, it's freaking messy, it is scary, it is depressing at times, seems insurmountable, but it's also so full of joy and so worth it. And my message for all of you is that I hope that I conveyed in this podcast is that you are not alone. There are stories out there, countless stories that don't get told on these big fancy podcasts and media networks. And I hope that you realize that the work that you are doing is important and you're absolutely not alone. So if you ever feel like you need support, just reach out. The Quivira Coalition is a great network that can connect you to all sorts of people who are doing this good work with you. And with that, just thank you, everybody. And I hope you enjoy this episode. Dylan, thank you so much for joining us on the podcast today.
Yeah, happy to be here. Thanks for inviting me.
Okay, let's start a little bit with your background. Tell me what it was like growing up and how you found your way into agriculture.
Grew up in Topanga Canyon, sort of a natural area on the outskirts of Los Angeles between the beach and the valley. And so although I grew up going to school in the city and the suburbs, I got a lot of exposure to nature and grew up with a creek in the backyard and a few friends and neighbors that had horses or a little bit of livestock, but not a huge amount of interest or focus on them when I was growing up there, although I liked them. But because of my ample amount of time that I spent in nature, and not really knowing what I wanted to do with my life. When I was finishing up high school and trying to figure out what I wanted to focus on in college, I decided to focus on the natural sciences and went out to Boulder, Colorado to study environmental studies, which at the time was, the program there was considered one of the better ones in the country, and went out there. And as I was going through my coursework there, I didn't feel like I was getting the sort of training or preparation for what I wanted to do, which was, have some sort of utility in conservation of natural areas, or sustainability, as we were referring to it primarily at the time, and added on evolutionary biology as a second major to hopefully get some more hard skills. Nonetheless, as I was leaving college, I had the overwhelming feeling that I was going to be useless leaving university. And I had spent my last year I even wrote papers to try to get into some other classes like programming for, like things like that, just to see if I could get some more hard skills. But also in that effort, started working at a sustainable farm, CSA, local in Boulder, and worked managing the greenhouses there and managing the tomato sales and things like that. So by the time I was graduating, I knew I either wanted to work in conservation biology research or sustainable agriculture. Coming out of college, I decided that the first thing I was going to do was conservation biology. And I had tried to orient my time at college to focus on primates. Naturally very interested in them. They're a very charismatic species. And my first job coming out of college was working for someone else's PhD on a research team in Peru and doing behavioral biology data collection on saddleback and emperor tamarins. And it was a lot of fun. I spent a lot of time in the field and I learned a lot. And I learned a lot about what the process would be like to try to have a career in primatology. And it's very competitive because they are so, charismatic. But ultimately I left there despite enjoying the work a lot, feeling like it wasn't the right focus. That, like, I've often referred to it as literally missing the forest for the trees, just because we were so focused on this one species, and moving through a whole ecosystem that was going backwards, that was getting degraded because of a whole slew of different interests and contexts. And ultimately came back from that experience wanting a more broadacre approach, a more broadacre focus to restoration of landscapes. I didn't know any sort of solutions, but I did find my way into a permaculture design course in Los Angeles, being taught by Larry Santoyo, who's known around these parts for he's been doing it a long time, and he's worked on a lot of projects. And and so I got to spend a lot of time with him. I ended up doing a mentorship with him, and through that process, I got a lot more exposed to a ton of the solutions out there that I hadn't been taught in the 5 years and 2 majors that I spent at college. And one of them was holistic planned grazing. And the irony that it took all that personal research and work over here on the West Coast is that the office for the Savory Institute is right down the road from where I went to school, and I hadn't heard a thing about them.
And what was it about Savory's mission that spoke to you? Like, what was it that you had been looking for that whole time?
But the part of Savory's mission that spoke to me was it was multifaceted. For one, it was a broad acre solution. It was a way to manage large acreage using natural solutions to restore landscapes. But the other part of it that really satisfied what I was looking for is that it grounded my ecological ideals that I had been focusing on throughout high school and college. And it said, basically what Savory said was, this is work you can do to restore broad landscapes, but in the process of doing so, the byproducts, the fruits of your labor, are going to be the best meat out there that you can get for your family, and put on market, and at the same time make a living to support yourself. And a lot of the training that I'd received, or education I'd received in college, a lot of it, whether it was the primatology route, depended on funding from universities for grad school or PhD work, or grants, a lot of Greenpeace clipboard holding to, try to receive charity. And there's nothing wrong with any of those things, but I really wanted to do ecological work that supported itself. And so that was one thing that, that excited me about the design work that I was seeing in the permaculture world. It's maybe few and far between that people are making a living in that area. And it might even be one of the weakest parts of the permaculture side of things, is having that financial groundedness. And so ultimately Savory's mission kind of grounded that ecological ideal and showed me a way that we could do work and support ourselves. And ultimately what that means is that the work will continue.
Yeah, exactly. Oh, that's awesome. And then I think that probably sparked an interest in meat for you too. You were like, oh, that's really cool. You could get a really high quality product out of this in such a win-win situation. So
Yeah. The meat side of it was, I think, it had been an interest of mine and for a long time, not so much as a profession, but as a way of, that so many modern and urban people desire to be reconnected with this sort of mysterious and faraway aspect that's so central to your life, which
yeah.
is like where your food comes from. And, I like I said, I'd spent some time growing food, but there was also the mysterious aspect for me of, the slaughter and how the living, walking livestock became meat in our refrigerator. And that coupled with, chronic health issues that I ended up resolving with eating clean food rather miraculously after trying a lot of different like physical approaches to it. That was very shocking to me, and it spoke a lot. And so I knew that was going to be a part of my life, even if it wasn't professionally.
Yeah, so it sounds like you did a lot of personal research that led you in the direction of permaculture and then savory. And then it sounds like you found a sort of ranching mentor named Frank Fitzpatrick. Tell me more about him and what you learned from working with him.
Yeah, Frank was a great mentor to me because he's, many things, but one of them is honest and straightforward. And so, I had written to a handful of pastured grazing operations, doing holistic planned grazing, that were near enough to me that I could start to go volunteer or work there on the weekends. I had been trying to figure out how to get on land for a while, and not coming from agriculture, I didn't really understand why anyone would hire me to do that. So I always imagined that I was just going to have to learn this on my own by getting access to land. And after, spending a lot of time on Zillow and talking to real estate agencies, just and conservation agencies, trying to figure out how to access land, and even writing some proposals to conservation agencies that did entertain my idea. And the conversations would kind of trail off at some point. I knew well why I wouldn't have taken a chance on me at that time, which was because I had no experience. And so it was a bit of a bold ask on my end. And so it was actually after I was going to a lot of classes and ranch visits and conferences to try to expose myself to figure out how to take the next step towards this. And it was one stark moment was meeting the NAP apprentices from Quivira. I think I was probably 26 at the time, and was meeting some that were like 22 and, not coming from an agricultural background. And from talking with them, I could see how competent they had become in, just a year or two of work on through their apprenticeship, and knew that that's what I needed to do. I needed to get experience. The theory wasn't going to carry me through. And so Frank of 5 Bar Beef wrote back and said he could use some help. And I started going down there on the weekends down in Silverado. I don't know much about the grazing scene in Orange County, except for that there's not a lot going on there. He's in his 70s. He's been doing this a long time. This ranch down there in Silverado is he lives at a house 10 minutes from it, and that's the house he was born in. And so I went down there and started building polywire fencing, and he started teaching me about low stress stockmanship, which, I had already come across, I spent so much time studying theory, I'd come across Bud Williams and Steve Coate and Whit Hibbard, and he would tell me to be quiet and keep my hands by my side, and, tell me where to stand by a fence, and sometimes put me in terrifying places, but, I really started learning a bit about stockmanship there. There's certain aspects of stockmanship that, is a little intuitive, but a lot of it isn't, because we are predators, naturally. And so we often don't move in ways that speak calmness, to the animals. And So yeah, I worked there with him, and that's where the first beef butchery I was exposed to was as well. I have a bunch of ridiculous stories, but yeah, Frank was a great mentor to have for that first year or so of working with livestock.
There's some folks in the apprenticeship, at least is what I've seen, is they've got the theory really down, and then you go out and you see what actually happens on the ground, and it may look a little different than what the perfect ideal things you learn in books might be. Was that hard for you to see the difference between theory and practice?
I had the natural struggle of bridging the two in terms of actually like developing the competency. But I went into Frank's operation with the mindset of I'm going to do whatever this person asks me to do,
Mhm.
and I'm going to finish the day. And if I don't like it, then I'm not coming back.
Mhm.
And for example, like when there's a beef butchery day, that he has a mobile butcher come out to do those, and he raises Barzona cattle. I can't remember what the mix of breeds is, but it's sort of a unique breed of cattle. I don't meet a lot of people that raise them. He doesn't castrate any of his cattle, and he doesn't dehorn anything, so they have massive horns, and
Hmm.
they're all and so the herd he has there is around 60 throughout most of the year. And when we go to move them, these bulls are just full of testosterone, and they get excited, they start fighting, and
Yeah.
stuff like that while you're moving. And a lot of the times the ones that we're culling are the ones that are the most disobedient and most aggressive. And so we need to get the bulls into 4 separate corrals for them to be shot and harvested, and the butcher's going to be there at a specific time and leave at a specific time, and it's going to cost the operation, regardless of whether we've gotten that work done.
Mhm.
And so, like I said, he's teaching me low stress livestockman principles, and then at the same time there's a point where like the bull has to get into the right place, and it's definitely not low stress at every moment of that.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
so yeah, and so there's always that place where the reality meets the theory, and
Mhm.
you just have to get the job done, of course not doing anything that would like violate some sort of humane
Right.
principles of animal treatment, but yeah,
Yeah.
you're making noise at that point.
That's interesting. Why does he choose not to castrate? Is there any flavor difference? I know it's probably less stressful not to pin a calf down and castrate, but on the other end, is there any difference in the meat quality or flavors or anything?
Yeah, so he might be able to speak better to flavor, which I'm sure he would have something to say about. The part that I know, I think the main reason that he decided to do that is because of his familiarity and association with the Weston A. Price Foundation.
Mm.
Weston A. Price Foundation, perhaps listeners will know, but if you won't, is an organization that's been around for a while, trying to link traditional food practices to and do the research behind it to demonstrate why these things were done, and often the health benefits that come from a nutritionally dense, largely animal diet. And he has a lot of customers that are familiar with those principles, and there is a general belief around added health benefits of having testosterone in the bull. So I think that's the main reason that he doesn't do that.
Yeah. So
Yeah,
wild that that's how you learned is like intact bulls with horns.
yeah,
Trying to sort
yeah,
them and do it butchery on farm, which is another really big challenge. That's yeah, you got the trial by fire there.
for sure.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, so afterwards you went to work for Cole Bush, who is familiar to our guests. We had Diane Anastasio on the podcast, but yeah, what were some big lessons that came from working with Cole? It's quite a different operation in many, many ways. Yeah, what were some lessons you pulled from that experience?
Yeah, I worked with Diane for a few years, and
Nice.
still talk to her through the stuff they're doing with grazing school of the West. But yeah, so when I started working for Cole, I was still going to Frank's at the time as well. I had stopped for a little while during COVID. They kind of didn't need as much help anymore, and then I started up again following it. And my plan originally was to do a little work at Frank's and do a little work with Cole. I always had a lot of interest in cattle. For I mean, a huge reason was because of how it forces you to use stockmanship. Not that you don't need to do that with sheep, but there is a point where you can just pick up a sheep if
Sure.
for
Yeah.
a certain distance, and if you're really struggling. But yeah, when I had talked with Cole for years, by the point that I actually started working for her when she was just kind of planning her business and getting ready to launch in Ojai. And when she was ready to launch her business, I jumped on about a month after they bought their flock of sheep and goats. And I learned everything necessary to run a sheep business over the years that I worked for Cole. There's still tons to learn, but enough for me to start my own operation. And so everything from the nuts and bolts, which is building electric net fencing, setting up solar energizers, and keeping a fence hot. But then also, to my surprise, I had not gone into livestock thinking this was going to be part of it, but learning to work with dogs, with herding dogs, with our border collies, learning to go out and assess contracts for for those who don't know, it's a contract grazing operation. So we bring sheep and goats to various different properties around Ventura and Los Angeles County. And so, how to go out there and see how we're going to truck animals in, where we're going to get water from, how we're going to get access, all the things that were necessary to quote and plan for a contract grazing job, and then how to manage all of these aspects of livestock infrastructure in a mobile way. So, constantly rebuilding and redesigning our electric carts to move around and to get into tight spaces, driving water trailers around and things like that, and just keeping livestock happy in just a multitude of different contexts. And then, of course, also the business side of things, everything from insurance and taxes and accounting, and then introducing me to the shepherds throughout California and meeting a lot of people who have been hugely helpful in teaching me things about sheep management, being a shepherd, as well as people I still buy sheep from my operation and things like that.
Yeah, it's a nice way to get an introduction to that industry. And yeah, it sounds like working for Cole helped you sort of take that step into your own operation. So yeah, tell me about how you ended up finding the property that you're on now.
I had, while working for Cole, started getting paid in sheep so that I could start my meat operation. And so I had already started doing custom sales to individuals, slaughtering them on ranch and breaking them down in my house and wrapping them up and selling them to people. And through doing that, I had been in conversations with a newly opened restaurant called the Duchess in Ojai, and working on things with the chef there to figure out how we were going to get sheep into the restaurant there. And the owner of that restaurant, Zoe, her and her husband own several restaurants, a lot of them in Los Angeles, but that one up in Ojai, introduced me to an investor in their restaurant. And he had just bought a property in Ojai, and it's a unique property for our area. Our area has not a lot of flat going on, and this area does. It's very privileged. It's like it does have some decent flat pastures, which coming from the contract grazing side of things, I could fence anything. We can fence right down the side of a mountain if we need to, but we're getting paid to do that. And in a meat operation, I'm not getting paid to put in all that extra labor that goes into fencing in the impossible areas that people want brush clearance done. And so that was really important for if I was going to be building fence or eventually paying people to help me build fence, it needed to be done efficiently. And so I met him, we had some conversations, and he wanted to support young farmers. He knew he had land and water, and there's of course brush clearance to be done there, which I do. None of it's crazy. And and so kind of went from there, and he was happy to kind of see the fruition of his ranch is very close to that restaurant that he's invested in. And so we have a really tight loop there in terms of the sheep being produced about 5 minutes from that restaurant. And so it's a really nice, and my relationship with the chef there, Chef Saw, has grown over the years, and it's been an awesome experience to work with Saw because he's so invested in getting it locally and working on one of my main philosophies with me, which is the utilization of the whole animal. And so he's really taken it on to train his staff, and which are also excited about the gesture as well. And so that's how I got the access there, and it's continued to be a good relationship.
Awesome. Tell me about your business today. What do you sell? How does it work? What does it look like?
My business, Book Hearth and Husbandry, has primarily focused on lamb and mutton sales. As a small producer, I have about 200 sheep on pasture at any given time of the year. And, we do custom slaughter and, cut and wrap that goes directly to people, to private chefs for events and things like that. And then sales to restaurants and a little bit now to butcher shops as well. Obviously, as many listeners probably will know, the stuff that goes to restaurants and butcher shops has to be taken to the USDA. And so I have a growing good relationship with the USDA slaughter facility that I like. And anyone who's done it will know that that's a relationship you don't have a lot of options in. And after going to a few, I've been able to have a good working relationship with this plant and, kind of working with me with where my business is at and what I want and how I'm running things. And we put them into different restaurants. Sometimes I have standing relationships where my lamb is in the restaurant year round with just a handful of restaurants right now. Two of my longest supporters, I'll say three of my longest supporters have been the Duchess, which is a Burmese restaurant in Ojai, high-end Burmese restaurant. That's where Chef Saw is working. And then Pinion, where I sell lamb. Pinion is a pizza restaurant, actually. And I sell to Jeremy and Tony there. And they have also been just incredibly supportive and creative in the ways that they use the lamb in their restaurant. So, they're putting it on pizza, but then, they're getting a whole lamb. So, they're doing rib chop specials and they're making sausages. They're doing all sorts of cool things there. And Rory's Place as well, which is also in Ojai, and Chef Maeve there is, been really cool. And I know that she's hiring on people. One of her newest hires, Abraham, is a butcher himself, and so they're getting ready to do whole animal breakdowns, and we'll have lamb meatballs on the menu this week. Nice. There. And so that's the lamb sales side of thing. And then along with my championing of whole animal utilization, another focus that I have is trying to increase people's exposure to eating older animals. And this is something that I'm not alone in. Other people have started this work and, a little bit of marketing about these sorts of things and getting people familiarized with it. But I've also been selling mutton to people. So, if I'm selling mutton, these are not ones that I birth or buy as lambs. These are things that I often buy that are leaving other regenerative grazing outfits breeding operations. And so when they're no longer, breeding for those traits anymore, or they're getting older, I'll buy some of those and sell them as mutton. And this is something that's been hugely successful at a few of those restaurants as well. And people are often surprised that it's like a lot of people will go into it a little nervous, and it's been interesting to see how well it's done at the restaurants where we've done it. So, those were the primary things that I was selling. And then, another aspect of this is something that it's been a little bit hit and miss in terms of I haven't had regular scheduling, but been teaching butchery classes as well. There's a lot of interest around it, a lot of, back to land sort of movement and traditionalist movements that are really interested in regaining and relearning these skills, bringing them into their own communities. And so I've taught a handful of lamb butchery courses and pig butchery courses, and those will be increasing in the future. Cool. And, be a little more standardized through a couple different ways. We'll be doing not only our standard, and I've largely modeled after Brendan Sheard, my butcher teacher's classes. Doing sort of an 8-person class where it's very hands-on, knives in everyone's hands, and doing a breakdown like that. But then also doing, for people who don't want to be so hands-on, doing more of a demonstration. So cooking food, having drinks, and watching how it's broken down. And that'll be a class for more 20 people.
Oh, that sounds fun. That's really cool.
Yeah.
Nice. Yeah. And then when we were talking before, you keep sheep on different properties, but this past year you kept them on your home property. You said in that experience, holistic management felt which is a big part of your operation, felt more like a sport rather than a concept. Now that you're kind of getting into your own operation, really feeling through what you're going to be doing for your own property management. Yeah. Tell us more about how it's going, how you feel about implementing those on your own.
Yeah. So having the sheep stay on one property year round poses certain grazing plan difficulties, which is what all holistic plan grazing focuses on. But I could kind of, with the contract grazing, you kind of get to jump around that because you have natural rest periods built in already because you're normally going to graze a property and not come back to it for a year. And even since I've been on this lease property, the main property that I run my sheep on, I have my small ranch that I graze the neighbors around there. And, I could get off the grass at the main lease property and let it get its legs under it and then come back when it's ready. Whereas this year, going the full year round, there's a point when the grass is growing where you don't really want to be on it because it's barely got any chance to grow. You can smash it really easily and you don't want to destroy that or, use that pasture up when it's barely got anything to give you. And so it's made me think about the landscape in much more detail to figure out where I want to have my sheep at all times a year. And so one thing we did this year for a couple different reasons is as the grass was starting to grow and, just short, we got the flock up into the chaparral and into the native perennial ecotypes that we have there. And it wasn't just that we could get them off the small grass, but it actually turns out that some of those plants that we're trying to cut back in numbers, like the laurel sumac and things that are like basically not palatable most of the year. These are low succession plants. Ojai went through a big fire, what was California's biggest fire back in 2018. It's probably like the 7th or 8th or 9th now. And during that time of year is when that was at least one of the times when that plant is palatable. So we were able to not only give the grass some time to grow by getting in there, but we were also able to impact an area better than we normally can at other parts of the year by just because that's when it's palatable. And so that was really a fortunate thing. And I'll actually be able to, I'm planning on doing that a little bit better this year because I was kind of discovering it as we moved into this season. I've grazed laurel sumac before in the contract grazing business, but palatability is not something that happens on a schedule every year. It's not something that it's like, okay, it's November 1st. And so we're going to be able to graze sage or laurel sumac. It has to do with when the rain's coming and what part of the life cycle of that plant the plant is in and when those secondary compounds are going to start showing up. And so I'll have to, review my notes and look at pictures that I took of it to kind of try to get on there at the exact time again and hopefully impact it better next year.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, you're learning. That's really cool that you can kind of use these different tools and it shifts over time. And it's just exciting. You're at the beginning of, only a couple of years into this and more and more information every year. You'll get better and better.
Yeah.
Yeah. Nice. Yeah. Tell me a little bit about how Cole was able to shape your business. Like how, speaking to the listeners who might want to be starting their own business and businesses. And you said, you originally went at it like pretty individual. Like you just started writing letters and starting putting together projects. Then you realize like, oh, I've got to get some more experience before I do this. What advice do you have for people who have aspirations to start their own business, but are looking to use partnerships to get there? Like what have you learned from that partnership with Cole?
When you're going into an agricultural operation as someone who doesn't have any background or experience in it, you're going to be a liability rather than an asset for a certain amount of time, and you just need to recognize that. And so if you have the ability, that's why I volunteered my time initially so that I could have some time to get experience and become useful. And I would certainly recommend that to anyone who can afford to do that with any sort of free time you have. If it's something you really care about, just take your time off and begin to learn not only the general skills, but if it's an operation that you want to work for, learn how they do things there. Every operation is doing things differently, down to the very minute details of how you tie two fences together and things like that. And that way, when you come in, you can be very useful. And at that point, after you have a year of experience under your belt, you're not only not going to be a liability necessarily if you've been, dedicated and focused and, learning the craft, but you're also part of a increasingly small pool of skilled labor that a lot of people would love to have on. I mean, this is a situation that a lot of outfits find themselves in, where they are desperate for more people to help, but not desperate enough to train up someone, or they just don't have the facilities or time to do that. So once you are participating in this industry and you have a bit of the training under your belt, you'll have a lot of options and a lot of opportunities will open. And I mean, since I have worked for Cole, with what I learned there, I've gotten a lot of opportunities that I've turned down because I'm doing stuff in Ojai, but lots of opportunities where people are starting up projects and they need someone to come manage animals, as maybe part of a much larger thing they're starting up, and that's just really, that's just throughout the state of California, but that'd be true anywhere.
I kind of want to go back to this butchery bit because it seems like it's a really strong part of your business. You've got the grazing aspect and the partnerships in the community and the restaurants. Tell me a little bit about, like, why do you love whole animal butchery and cookery? Like, why is that something that is such a strong piece of your business?
One of the most common questions I get asked whenever I go speak with anyone or just people I meet that want to talk to me about the business is how I feel about slaughtering animals that I've spent time with and that I care for. And obviously these are largely coming from people who haven't participated in doing something like that. And ultimately, like, you have to have a good understanding of why you're doing what you're doing. There's a lot of important things that happen in life that require you to do something difficult and make a sacrifice in order for something better. And the way that I understand that is that, I am taking something good. I am taking the life of one of my livestock in order to provide for the health of my community, my family, and my community. And so when I nested in that hierarchy of values, I that's what helps me understand why I'm doing what I'm doing. Now, nonetheless, it is a powerful experience. It's a heavy experience. So when you do it, you want to do it the best way you can. So you're going to do it, low stress, and you're going to do it quickly and as painlessly as possible. But when you do it, you don't just kill the ribeye of an animal, you kill the whole animal. And it has become common practice. This is one of the reasons that I'm passionate about it, is that it has become common practice to throw out large amounts of the animal, things that people, if you take it to the USDA facility, people are only they're going to charge you for everything they give you back. And even if that means that they're going to just throw it away if you don't take it back. And so people are only going to buy back what they sell. And some people haven't developed or don't have access to markets, or just aren't interested in selling some of these less common cuts. And, some of the examples of that would be like the offal, OFFAL. And that is, your all the organ meats. So, your liver and spleen and kidneys and heart. All these sorts of things are, for the majority of animals, not bought back. An example for pigs is a lot of large-scale processing facilities have stopped scalding pigs, which is where you put the pig in about 150-degree water and you scrape all the hair off of it. And you do this because this is how you can harvest the skin and fat, and the pig's fat there's a layer between the pig's fat, and it's about half of the back fat is on the skin side of the pig. And if you don't scald it, what you do is you kill the pig and you just peel off the skin and the fat. And so you're losing at least, if not 50% or more of the fat, and that goes right to the trash as well. And so going back to like the heaviness of it, you want to pay respect for this animal. And so one way you can do that is by utilizing the whole thing. And so, that's one part of it. That's just, that's part of the harvest. And then there's the cookery. And we live at a time where we're well into the industrialized food system, and people have all sorts of degenerative health issues that are chronic and common and increasingly so. And we have terms like food deserts to describe whole areas of human habitation. And as this regenerative ag marketplace develops, we have rightfully concerns about access based on financial situations and things like that. And so this is another answer to both those things. It requires more, and I'll go into that. But often those parts that we are throwing away are the most nutritious parts. This is another way where you can connect with your local Weston A. Price chapter and learn about that, or just go online and look at their materials, and many other places now as well. This is stuff that was known by not just a few ethnic traditions around the world. It's true in every tradition around the world. Everyone knew these things, the health benefits without any science, that this is something that they understood, that they could feel maybe when they were a little bit more in tune with the way that food affected their body. But because they're so not desired, they're often not only the most nutritious cuts, but they're often the cheapest cuts. And I don't mean just the offal, like the liver and the kidneys, but also the less common cuts, like, a chuck roast on a beef, or the shanks on a lamb, or the leg, or the shoulder. The shoulder has got to be the cheapest cut on any grazing animal. And the reason, I'm sure there's more to it than this, but the reason these things are not commonly purchased when someone goes into the store is, I think, first, just habit and knowledge and just cultural context. But people, our culture, whether, I don't know if it's just, wanting things to be done very quickly, or just lack of education, but people are generally looking for searing cuts. So something that you can just put on a hot pan and have done in, 10 to 30 minutes is generally how most people are going to cook meat. And so, everyone's looking for, on lambs, often the rib rack is probably the most common thing that people are doing. It's the most common thing in a restaurant. It's considered a high-end plate in any sort of business that's doing parts and pieces. That cut will be substantially more expensive. I've seen, I think locally, the person at the farmer's market near me sells them for $37 a pound.
Wow.
And I've gone places in nice butcher shops in Los Angeles that sell them for $50 a pound.
Wow.
And, and that's right across the street from a Whole Foods, which I'm sure sells it for less, and they're not having any trouble selling it. And I don't know what Whole Foods says it for, but it's probably, close to a farmer's market price. And like I said, like, those are the searing cuts. When you think about cooking, this is something that I've learned from my butchery teacher. And, this is a useful way to frame things if you're about to start your whole animal cooking processes. There's only really three ways to cook anything. And that's searing, braising, and roasting. And the cheapest cuts that most people ignore are the braising cuts. And what braising is cooking your meat in liquid. And so that means, water, broth, wine, cider, kombucha, anything you have, you put it in there and you bring it to a low simmer and you cook it. And it does take time. That's what you're doing, is you're using that liquid to break down the strong connective tissue in the muscle. You do that low and slow. And I think some people might be deterred by that. They're working a 9-to-5 job. They're not at home. They're not going to wait till 9 p.m. to eat dinner. But it's far from that being the case. I personally love braising. It's probably my favorite way to cook things. I often wander away from the stove, and braising allows you to do that. Once you get it going, which means, by get it going, means bringing it up to a simmer and adding some salt and seasonings, and then you can leave a lid on there so your liquid doesn't evaporate. And then you can go do other things. But if you are someone who works all day, they have stock pots that are, not prohibitive in their cost, and you can start them before you leave to go to work and come back to a cooked meal.
Oh, yeah, definitely.
They're very safe. And so so already you're accessing that those tough cuts are not tough just for no reason. They're tough because they're used more. And because they're used more, they have to put more of their nutrients there. And that toughness is that compacted nutrients, being repeated over and over again. And what you're doing through your cooking methods is making those available again, not only to your teeth, but also to your stomach. And so all of that to say that this is another reason that I value so much the whole animal butchery and cookery, is that it is an answer for, people who are on a tight budget. This is still an example of someone just going into a market and buying a chuck roast or a lamb shoulder. And this is going to be the cheapest cut, and it's just as accessible for, if you have an outlet. And I don't know how cheap those stock pots are now, but they're not prohibitive. And
yeah, you can find one at a thrift store. Yeah.
Yeah, and you can come back to a home cooked meal, and so a lot of it is culture and education. So that's maybe the more pragmatic reason, but then there's also cultural reasons. Like there's so many beautiful traditions surrounding these things. There's so many interesting ways to work with all these other different cuts, and it makes cooking a lot more fun as well. I think one really cool thing that so few people are doing is a term that a lot of people would be familiar with normally from like a small white plate restaurant that is like most of these things, actually a peasant way of preserving and eating food is confit, or the English version is potted meat. And this is a food preservation technique. This is using the fat that you didn't throw away from your, backyard pig, if that's what you're doing, to melt it down. You cook the meat in the fat. You pour it into something no one knows about is confit pot, which you can find on the internet, which are increasingly having holes drilled to the bottom of them to grow flowers in, because they are just beautiful. But it's beautiful pottery that you then pour your fat and meat mixture into, that's seasoned, and you can keep that in the fridge, and that meat is cooked, and the meat will stay good for, I've kept them for 8 months. They might go longer. And that's fast food. Like that is, like, you can come home, you can dig out a piece of meat. It's already cooked. You throw it into a skillet. Now you have your searing cut again, and you can smash it into a taco and whatever you want to do, and that's ready to go. And so, I could go on and on about that. But these are all the ways that, we can pay respect to the animal, acknowledge the reality of our wallet and our time. And I guess just the last point that I'll say about the whole animal cookery and butchery is that, as far as other, money saving goes, is that if you do have the capacity, if you have the cash flow and the storage, purchasing whole, half, quarter animals is the cheapest way you can purchase an animal, by a long shot. People are not only upcharging, which is not a small amount, like for paying for the cut and wrap of cuts, but they are also upcharging for the extra marketing expense of having to sell each and every cut and having 1,000 interactions with customers rather than a single one. And so when I think about, these nutrition and economic issues, it seems like a lot of it can be helped in, individuals' lives through some cultural development and some education.
And you're clearly really passionate about it too. Like, it's something that you enjoy. Like, would you say that that's another reason why you've built it into your business?
Yeah, absolutely. So this is an important point to make as well about the whole animal butchery and cookery is, my first foray into it was, at least the cookery aspect of it, was I bought a half cow from Frank while I was still working with him, and was excited to have some meat that I could share with my friends and, family that came from livestock I was working with. And so I bought the half cow, which is no small amount of meat. And you're looking at probably around 400 pounds on average for a half cow. And very quickly worked my way through the steaks there and, about a month. And then was left with just hundreds of pounds of cuts that would fall into this category of braising meat. And so I got really good at braising, but the part that I want to focus on is that I love not just cooking for myself, but for cooking for people and having a full table to eat with people at. And, this is another reason that I'm focusing on whole animal cookery and butchery, is to try to encourage people to contend with larger cuts. And if it's too big for yourself, then have people over and, hopefully they return the favor as well. It's like you're taking the time to braise a piece of meat. You might as well braise 8 pounds than, instead of 1. And of course you can save it and you can throw it in your fridge. But I really encourage people to commune and fill their table with neighbors and family and friends. And I think that's another part of why, my passion for it and things like that.
Yeah, my experience working as an intern on different farms with livestock in the past when I was just getting started was that some of the available meat to me wasn't the best cut. So like, I don't actually think I've had like a ribeye from many of the farms I ever worked on, because they were like going to sell them. I don't think they were ever going to keep those in the fridge or in the freezer for the interns. So we always had like these crazy cuts of meat, like eye of round and, like these kind of funky stuff. And it was always really fun. I think you have to just have this mentality when you're getting into cooking meat, especially for most of us. Like, I was a vegetarian before that. I did not know what I was doing.
Right.
And I think a lot of people, even if they're not vegetarian, they really only know how to cook sausage, hamburger patties, steaks, maybe. They just have this really limited, especially when you're, in your 20s and 30s. I really appreciated the fact that I just went for it. Like, I ruined a lot of meat, but like ultimately you just like, you eat it, it's a subpar meal, but you realize every dish that you've messed up is leading to a better one down the road. And now I'm like very comfortable braising meat and leaving it in a crock pot and giving directions to friends. And it took it took all of those failures to get to the point where I did feel comfortable. So I hope that's helpful. I'm sure you've had a lot of disasters.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I remember the first time I went to make broth, I like bought a bunch of expensive meat and like just threw it into I didn't really, I wasted a lot of special cuts there, trying that. And I don't even know what its fate became. Like anything, after you do something for the first time, you're kind of done with like 90% of the effort, and you get to spend the rest of your life doing the other 10%.
Yep.
And you go from it being like, okay, I'm going to rewind this YouTube video, 40 times to, okay, now I know how to do this without opening it up, to then understanding the principles of it and getting to experiment with the principles. Like you're not ever concerned that you don't have oregano or wine or something like that, but you're like, okay, I just need a liquid, or I just need like a green herb, and you can really start playing with it and become creative, and it's effortless, and it's a way to, just use whatever you have in the house rather than having to go to the market to get specific ingredients and things like that.
Yeah, that's huge. That's huge, because I think that's what stops a lot of people from cooking their own meals is they want the recipe, they see the recipe, then they don't have every single ingredient, and then they just kind of freeze. And then you realize over time it's the principles that matter. It's not necessarily that specific tiny ingredient. I mean, honestly, with braising especially, like you're not going to notice if it's wine versus like, some vinegar and water. Like after time, just kind of spruce it up, and you can make it really good with whatever you have generally.
Yeah, it's become a common practice for me for like anything that I have that comes fizzy that I don't finish just gets set by the stove, and that all goes into the braising pot.
Yeah, that's awesome.
Because if you're doing big meals, you're going to need a lot of liquid to cover it.
I just love that. Well, thanks for sharing about your passion behind the cooking part, because I think that's something that is special about your business, that you're marketing to people who really do care. Not everybody does. Like, not everybody does care about this, but there are a lot of people, I think, increasingly who are asking questions about like, hey, why is everybody sick? Why is everybody in my family having digestive disorders or, these weird symptoms that we can't figure out why? I think more and more of us are having those questions and coming to people like the meat that you're selling for answers. So that's really cool.
Yeah, it's remarkable the amount of it's not all of them, but there's a good chunk of my customers that come to me with they've been battling health issues for a long time, and they're only going to eat meat that they know is coming from a good source, because whatever ailment they have is worse than whatever I was going through, and that was enough to get me on this path.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay, well, let's wrap up here with our rapid fire section. So don't spend too much time thinking about the answers to these, just whatever comes off the top of your head. And then, just to get to know a little bit more about you. So first one is finish this sentence. Being a beginning agrarian means...
Being an agrarian, being on the land, my working with the land and raising things on the land to whatever degree that I have to think about and feel and experience the world through that being on the land is what makes me an agrarian.
I love that. This next question is very fitting for our conversation, but if you had a private chef to cook you any dish after a long day, what would it be?
So after eating a lot of lamb, I would like a professional chef to cook me something that I still don't do particularly well. Like I would love, what is it called? Like I would love like a professional chef to cook me like haggis, which is like like meat and vegetables cooked inside the stomach of an animal. Like I've never done that before, and I'd love to see someone because I'm gonna do it, but I'm probably not gonna do it super well, the first several times, and so that would be pretty cool.
Yeah. Oh, that's a good one. All right, what's one book on your bookshelf?
I just recently read Tolkien's translation of Gawain and the Green Knight.
Wow.
It's not a long book, but it was it's a story from the Arthurian legends, and that was not something I grew up with. And I've been doing for years I read a lot of like how-to farmer books, a lot of like nonfiction, and spent years there. And then recently I've just been putting my head into a lot of the great fiction from history. And Gawain and the Green Knight was a beautiful story.
That's great. I like that you're mixing it up with the nonfiction. I feel like that's, you get to a point where you're like, all right, we need to expand the mind a little bit beyond agriculture books. Yep.
Yeah.
What's one musical artist I should listen to?
I've been listening to Gene Ritchie. and she just, I just, the way you do these days, just kind of stumbled upon her as I was listening to other things, but she does a lot of, like, I think she's out of Appalachia, and she does a lot of like folk songs from like Ireland and Britain. And it's just, it really kind of makes you, it just has a sense of pastoral life in it, kind of just ingrained in it. That just sounds so beautiful, and it kind of fits. It doesn't jar my reality so much. Like when I go from moving sheep around, it kind of just fits in with whatever I'm doing. And yeah, she has got a beautiful folk voice.
That's great. What's a non-ag-related hobby or interest of yours?
This is always a difficult question for me because I basically spend all of my time, even if it's not directly related to making money in the business, a lot of what I do is at least somehow connected in. But I like that. Like I like everything kind of connecting to each other. Things that I would consider my hobbies would be a lot of the like meat smithery that I get to spend my free time doing, like making charcuterie and sausages and salami and things like that. Of course, reading. That's what I do with a lot of my free time now. And, I guess, I mean, it's like, even this is tied in, but I'm like learning to like work on all the machines that I depend on for work. But like, I could take them to the mechanic, but I get a lot of, because it's not my work, I get a lot of joy out of it.
Yeah.
And so just learning how to work on my ATVs and things like that has been a lot of fun.
Yeah. It's so funny. Everybody I ask that question to, they're like, wool related things and like horse related things. It's funny how they are all intertwined, and that's okay.
Yeah.
Okay. A nugget of advice for other beginning agrarians is?
Go volunteer your time. If you have no experience with it, go volunteer your time, figure out which area you want to plug in at. I had tried so many different avenues before I was certain about the livestock one, and meet tons of people, talk with people, develop personal relationships. That is a vestige of the agricultural community, is that a lot of opportunities come to people, not the best resume, but people they know that, are putting in the work. But I think that's ultimately the best thing you can do is be honest and maintain your integrity, your word, and become a hard worker. Even if you don't have any experience and you don't have any time to volunteer, if you demonstrate that you are a hard worker, a lot of operations would rather hire an honest, hardworking person over someone with a lot of experience who is not those things.
Yeah, that's great advice. Okay, last one. Where can people find more information about you and your business?
So I think I'm most active on my Instagram, which is at BOEK_house. Boekhouse. But I also have a website, which is boekhouse.com, and you can join the mailing list there and kind of stay updated for classes and new offerings, and where you can find the meat, which restaurants and things like that.
Awesome. Well, Dylan, thank you so much. This has been such a pleasure to talk to you. You have so much passion for the work that you're doing, and it's so needed in this world. So thanks so much for joining us today. And we'll hope to keep in touch.
Yeah, I appreciate it, Taylor. That was a lot of fun.
Thank you so much for tuning in. If you'd like to connect to the broader Quivira community of ranchers, farmers, conservation and government agency professionals, educators, nature nerds, curious consumers, and more, we're excited to have you. Our website is quiviracoalition.org, and in the upper right, click on Get E-News to sign up for our newsletter, where we share happenings and events, learning opportunities, job postings, and more. Also, if you're enjoying this podcast, please leave us a review and a rating. It really will help other people find us and maybe even find their next step in regenerative agriculture. Thanks so much, and see you next time. This podcast was produced by Quivira Coalition in our quest to support resilience on working lands. Learn more about our work and how you can support regenerative agriculture and solutions to climate change at quiviracoalition.org. This episode was edited and engineered by Caleb Winsel-Fisher. A folk story, our theme music, was made by Alex Cristoforetti, and we're grateful for our guests who take time out of their busy lives to share their experiences with us.